Hi guys, this is Tegan here. I am going to start a new thing kind of on my channel. It's gonna be reading to you guys actually. And I've decided and I chose to start a book for you guys called The Last American Vampire by Seth Grahame-Smith, which is this right here. So far it's a very interesting book, and so I decided that I wanted to share it with you guys. So I'm gonna go ahead and start, I guess, and if you guys could leave comments below letting me know what you think, I'd greatly appreciate it. So here we go. Alright. Sorry about that. Alright, so this page is entitled Facts, and this is what it starts with, and this is what it says. It says, between 1860 and 1865, a confederacy of vampires attempted to conquer the United States, enlisting an army of men to fight on their behalf. They were defeated by Abraham Lincoln, a gifted vampire hunter, and a small brotherhood of immortals who were sworn to protect mankind, and they called themselves the Union. In the aftermath of the Civil War, these defeated vampires were scattered throughout Europe, Asia, and elsewhere. Their numbers were smaller than ever before, and when the vampires were faced with extinction, rumors of a new vampire leader and a new plot to enslave mankind had begun to surface. I think I'm going to move this camera just a little bit here. That's a little better. Okay. No, this is the introduction. This is not chapter 1. This is just an introduction, kind of, letting you know what's into the book. So, introduction. What a strange thing to be a vampire, to break free of death's gravity, to think that Henry has observed this earth with the same eyes, the same mind, uninterrupted for 250 years. To think that he has witnessed the fall of empires and the birth of nations. What stories could he tell? What volumes could he fill? Abraham Lincoln, a journal entry, December 15th of 1832. I was dying and I wasn't afraid. After all, I'd asked for this. I had asked for him to bring me as close to death as a man could get. Close enough to see the stitching that holds existence and inexistence together without actually tearing it. And here I was, perched on a high wire above Hades, 9 toes into the grave and the 10th on its way, and all was well and right. I'd heard it said that a certain peace washes over us when we stray close enough to death, that our bodies release chemicals to calm us, to ease us into the inevitable nothingness that drapes all of us in its black cloak sooner or later. Perhaps that's all it was, a biological calmness, or perhaps I distrusted that Henry knew what he was doing. A thought rang through the dark, bright and pleasing like a church bell on a cold, starry night. If I do die tonight, I thought, at least I'll die in October. The most American of months, when the first wisps of chimney smoke kiss the crisp apple air, and the promises of a World Series looms large in the imaginations of good and ever hopeful people in New England. When children have finished mourning their long summer when people had finished mourning the long summer and grown reaccustomed to the buzzing fluorescence of their classrooms. When Christmas is beginning to take shape in the horizon just beyond the cousins and the food comas of Thanksgiving. Closer still are the masks and the glow sticks of cotton spiderwebs of Halloween, and that one night when we embrace the darkness from which all America's descended. October is the gateway to the wonderful, the mystical finale of the American year. A place where life ends and celebration of life briefly begins. I began to taste blood in the back of my throat. Fear suddenly crept in, cold and unwelcome, tracking mud into the carpet of my cozy little death. I looked into Henry's eyes just before my own began to roll back into my head, those black vampire eyes I'd seen only once before, years earlier. He had showed them to me, those eyes, along with the hideous glass shards of his fangs, the calcified razors that were his claws. He had shown me because he needed me to believe the impossible. His face had been wild then, animal-like, but tonight it was careful and curious. The tips of his fangs were barely visible beneath his upper lip, his right hand on my throat, squeezing off my jugular, cutting off the blood to my brain. My brain, in turn, was carrying out its final instructions, ticking boxes on the pre-death checklist that humans have evolved over the eons. And all of that because I'd asked him to. Perhaps I'd misjudged Henry, perhaps this ancient, powerful vampire, whom I'd come to think of as a friend, meant to kill me after all. I felt like a zookeeper who wanders into a tiger's cage unafraid, only to be mauled to death. Why, he thinks, as he's being torn apart by those massive claws and teeth. How can this be? When I raised you, I fed you, loved you. ever since you were a helpless cub. Only in the final terrifying seconds does he understand that the love he gave was never returned, that he'd been too close, too familiar. I forgot it was a tiger, he thinks as he slept away. It was always a tiger. The edges of my vision were fuzzy, the darkness creeping closer to the center of my sight like those ever-tightening black circles at the end of silent movies and cartoons. I tunneled away at the dark, but there was no light at the end, no feeling of floating above my body. There was only the inner, the quiet. I thought of all the Halloweens and Thanksgivings and Christmases I would miss. I thought of my boys, when they were so small and helpless I could hardly stand it. And then there were no more thoughts. It had begun with a jingle 5 years earlier, a chime that had been affixed to the front door of the Five and Dime since the universe in its infancy, at the time just when the concept of God's imagination, its ring was as old and as quaint as the store itself, a store that had been a fixture of the little upstate town in Rhinebrook, New York, since 1946, selling damn near anything to damn near anyone. School supplies, knitting yarn, toilet brushes, toys, rain boots, electrical sockets, and whatever else customers were willing to plunk down their pocket change for, packed into shelves against wood-paneled walls or in bins lined with contact paper. I'd worked there off and on since I was 15, earning extra money for college, brimming with big ideas and big dreams of published novels and Manhattan book signings of tenured professionarships and corduroy blazers with elbow patches. College had come and gone, novels begun and abandoned, vows exchanged, children born, struggles endured. And there I was, behind that same counter, 15 years and 25 pounds later, not an inch closer to Manhattan than I'd ever been. There I was, 30 years old, greeting customers by name, watching the Yankees on a small color TV under the counter, selling pink pencil erasers and sink stoppers for pennies worth of profit from 8:30 in the morning until 5:30 at night, 6 days a week. Every week. Wash, rinse, repeat. There I was, clinging to the idea that there was still a place for Five and Dime in a Walmart world, still a chance for all those scraps of paper and their half-begun stories would congeal into a dream realized. Wow, I can't talk right now, sorry. By 2006, I'd heard that door jingle a million times, but one summer day, it seemed to ring with a slightly darker sound as a new customer stepped from the sunshine of East Market onto the checkered linoleum of our floor. I looked up from the sports section of the New York Post and saw a young man of 27 or so with dark, fashionably messy hair, expensive clothes designed to look tattered and cheap, dark sunglasses which he neglected to take off. I'd seen plenty of its kind before, the weekend visitors who drive up for the city to revel in the quaint and backwards way of us simple folk. The younger bandities who bring the Teutonic Parkway in to ironically spend their discretionary income. But this was no visitor, as it turned out. He was a local boy, not born and bred, but transplanted. "Hello," I said, the way one does in a small town. "Hello," said Henry, and went about his browsing. And that was that. I went back to my newspaper, not knowing that I had just been nudged an inch closer to Manhattan. Henry came in from time to time, bought things, and left. This went on for a number of months before we slowly evolved beyond the required pleasantries and started talking. Music, mostly. Henry was always eager to talk about music, and I was always happy to oblige. Other than writing it, it was the closest to a passion I'd had, as evidenced by the ever-evolving iPod mix that filled the store's speakers from open to close as its track culled from the deepest recesses of "You haven't heard this band yet" blogs. We talked about what we were listening to, gave each other recommendations, and so on. Henry's taste ran the gamut. The Beatles, Boards of Canada, Stockhausen, Count Bass, Ceballos, Chick Corea, The Doors, Captain Beefheart, Stravinsky, Sunny Day Real Estate, Elvis, Alice Coltrane, My Bloody Valentine, Patsy Cline. He was a one-man staff recommendation shelf at a failing record store, and I liked him instantly. Months passed and seasons changed and life went as it usually did, which is to say nothing of much note happened until one evening in the winter of 2008 the bell jingled and Henry hurried to the store carrying a package wrapped in brown paper, a package containing a bundle of ancient letters, a list of names and contact information, and 10 ancient-looking leather-bound journals, each one filled with tightly packed handwriting. They were the personal journals of Abraham Lincoln, chronicling his lifelong battle against the vampires that had shaped his destiny in long-haunted American night. Right, of course they were. I didn't believe a word of it, just as I don't believe in flying saucers or Santa Claus or happy endings. There were no such thing as vampires, let alone axe-wielding vampire hunters that went on to become the President of the United States. Henry, anticipating this, had seen fit to convince me that night in a shocking way that left me badly shaken. Once you've seen those glassy fangs, those pulsing blue veins, and the sensation of a bottomless hunger for blood, there is little room left for doubt. So began nearly 2 years of research and writing, poring over the journals and letters, chasing down the names in the list he'd given me, and conducting interviews with reluctant subjects. I wrote day and night, much of it in a notebook at the store counter, stopping only when a customer needed help. I'd been given the gift of a story that had already been written, a story that just needed to be carefully stitched together, like the boundary between existence and inexistence. The scribbled notebooks became a typed manuscript, the manuscript became a book, and the book was given to the world to be judged. My dream had only been realized in a dramatic fashion, or so I thought. Writing a book, as it turned out, wasn't all that big of a deal in the Twitter age. Certainly not as big as which pop star got arrested or which reality TV personality got her pre-baby body back. For one moment, shining moment, I was the ringmaster, and then, just as quickly as it had arrived, the circus packed up its tents and steamed on to the next town, and there I was back behind the counter, a few inches closer to Manhattan, but still miles away, living a life that suddenly felt 2 sizes too small. The idea came in the winter of 2011. It was a Monday morning, slow and snowy, the sidewalks empty, only the occasional car passing on the unplowed streets, hazards flashing. The store was dead as the world outside. I flipped through the pages of the post, ignoring the chance of Egyptian uprisings coming from the mono-speaker of my small television. One of the nation's morning shows was on, and news gave way to chat that gave way to weather, which was all I was really interested in. The weatherman forecasted more snow forever, endless winter, and then read out the names and showed the pictures of those lucky viewers who had reached their 100th birthday. The chosen few had seen a century pass before their eyes, gone from horses and buggies to Mars landers in the blink of a lifetime. One of today's celebrants was a man who'd reached the ripe old age of 108. "My word," said the weatherman. "Isn't that wonderful? Imagine the things he's seen." Imagine the things he's seen. I looked up from my paper. Something stirred in me, a vague memory of a passage of one of Abe's journals. I couldn't recall the words, not exactly, but I'd had the spirit of it. He'd written as a young man not long after training with Henry, wondering what it would be like as a vampire, wondering what it would be like for someone like Henry must have seen in his centuries. I went back through the old transcripts of Abe's journals on my computer. The originals were safely back in Henry's possession, and found the passage I was looking for. What a strange thing to be a vampire, to break free of death's gravity. Abe's journals had covered only 50-year span of Henry's life, but what about the other 400 years? What of a 21st century man born before Galileo or Shakespeare? Imagine the things he's seen. A man who, with the exception of a brief and turbulent period of being alive, had never had a cold or gray hair. That morning I did something I hadn't done in 20 years of working at the store. I closed early, braved the snowy roads to Henry's house. "Not interested," he said. His answer was immediate and unequivocal. For one, the last thing Henry wanted was more publicity. His fellow vampires had been upset enough when he shared his secret of Lincoln's journals. 2, he saw no point in looking back. Nothing kills a vampire as quickly as the past, he said. To that end, he'd never kept a journal of his own, never hung on to every letter the way Abe had. You'd have to keep moving. Make a point of staying engaged in the present. Otherwise, you end up like the old car, cautiously creeping along the snowy roads with your hazards on. Still talking Beethoven when everyone else has moved on to Batman. I persisted. He resisted. This went on for months. I would email and Henry would take days to reply, and when he did, he wasn't encouraging. "Henry, are you traveling? I haven't heard back from you regards my last email. I understand your concerns about privacy, etc., but I think that there's a way to get around these issues. Can we discuss this when you return?" His response: "Yes, I'm traveling. There's nothing to discuss. I don't see what good will come of me airing out my dirty laundry or further aggravating those of my kind who are already livid that I made certain details of our past public in the first place." Finally, in the spring of 2012, more than a year after I'd first broached the subject, Henry agreed to sit and hear me out. We sat in the study of the giant metaphor that was his mansion, old and Gothic on the outside, but completely redone on the inside, all concrete, iron, and glass. Open spaces and clean, tech-friendly surfaces, as if the very decor was there to strengthen his hold on the present. Nothing kills a vampire faster than the past. There we were, I with my takeout cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee steaming beside me, him with his hands folded in his lap and of his expensive jeans, an incredibly old, experienced mind, his clear brown eyes. "So," he said, "what would you have in mind? A rambling multi-century autobiography, a mopey triste of the drawbacks of immortality?" "I want to know what happened in Springfield," I said, "after Abe's funeral." I knew that being specific was the only shot I had. If I'd started with, "Tell me everything," or, "Ooh, whatever you feel like," he would have disengaged. When you're dealing with a man who has 5 centuries rattling around in his skull, you have to cast specialized bait or you'll catch nothing. In the course of writing about the journals, I'd learned that Ford's Theater hadn't been the end of Abraham Lincoln. What I didn't know was how he had escaped death and what had become of him after he did. It seemed as a good place as any to start. "How?" I said. "How did it happen? How did you do it?" Henry considered me with his old eyes. I could see the wheels turning, see him debating his next move. For a second I'd wondered if I'd have overstepped some invisible line, wondering if he was going to leap out of his chair, crack me open, spilling my innards onto the floor of his museum-quality home. To my great relief, he started talking. He talked until the day stretched into weeks, and the summer became Indian summer and then autumn. When the leaves of the Hudson Valley had reached the peak of their crisp, fiery bloom, we weren't even close to the middle of the story. But we were hooked, and the experience had infused Henry with the energy he hadn't felt since the fighting times. He was intoxicated by the distilled memories that had been fermenting for hundreds of years. He was, in the words of Norman MacLean, haunted by waters. I'd asked him questions. Sometimes I'd stop for clarification or elaboration. Mostly I just listened, taking notes and recording every word on my phone, both of us aware of and amused by the fact that we were living out of a fictional scenario imagined by Anne Rice almost 40 years earlier. I spent the better part of a year conducting these infrequent but intense interviews. When Henry felt he'd rambled on as much as he could, I began the task of transcribing months' worth of fragmented recollections. Excerpts of those transcripts appear on virtually every page of the book as indented text, writing the connective tissue between them and arranging it all into a palatable shape that would fit fashionably between 2 covers. I wrote about the iron and the electricity, rippers, Russian mystics, and Indian chiefs. I wrote about the world wars, the rubber barons, about Roosevelts and the Kennedys, blood and murder, and lost loves. Henry gave me the freedom to change and shine up his description of certain things. He can be a very matter-of-fact speaker, even when describing the glory or fantastic. But I was strictly forbidden from changing a single word that might alter the truth of what was being told. And what I was told, as it turns out, is something of caper, a manhunt spanning 4 centuries, a hunt for the greatest enemy America's ever faced, a shadowy puppeteer who seems to confound Henry at every turn. Because of that, perhaps there are some parts of Henry's remarkable life that are simply not relevant to the larger tale and have not been documented in these pages. Another time, perhaps. Between running the store and raising 2 resentfully growing boys from a distance, it took me nearly a year to put together this manuscript in its rough form. When I was done, Henry set about to making his own alterations, pulling back where he thought it had gotten too colorful, pushing me when he sensed I was trying to be flattering or respectful. He insisted on naked judgment, warts and all. One thing Henry found especially lacking were my descriptions of death. They read like a eunuch writing about an orgy, is how he put it. I asked him how to describe it as best he could. I wanted to know what dying felt like in exquisite detail, and so that I would convey the experience of my own words. "It's impossible," he said, "to explain. You have to experience it." And so I asked him to kill me, and he obliged. I shuffled down East Market Street, crisp leaves underfoot, the taste of blood clinging to my mouth like copper fillings. I had no memory of how I'd gotten there. One moment I was dead, and the next I was in the center of town, the sun rising in a cold and cloudless sky, my feet guiding themselves down a well-worn path. In that rote and distant manner, they brought me back to the store, to the counter, to my notebook. In my fog, as the first customers began to trickle in, I wrote down everything I could remember, determined to capture the words before the high of being alive wore off. Just as the towering myth of Abraham Lincoln, honest backwoods lawyer, spinner of yarns, righter of wrongs, tells a story of the truth, so is the myth of American woefully incomplete. The country that Ronald Reagan once called shining city upon a hill has in fact been tangled up in darkness since before she was born. Millions of souls had been graced on the American stage over the centuries, played both parts in great and small, and made their final exits. But of all souls who witnessed America's birth and growth and fought in her finest hours, the one who had a hand in her hidden story, the one whose soul who remains to tell the whole truth. What follows is the story of Henry Sturgis. What follows is the story of an American life. Seth Grahame-Smith, Rhinebeck, New York, October 2014. Alright guys, so that's the introduction chapter of the book. Again, it's called The Last American Vampire. It's a novel by Seth Grahame-Smith. And actually, believe it or not, I got this for $1 yesterday at the dollar store. They have a really good selection of books. And it's actually a really decent size. There's like 400 pages to this book, which I'm really excited to read, and I'm excited to share with you guys. And then there will be plenty more where that came from. So, I guess I'll let you guys go for now. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know if you want me to continue, or if I shouldn't. Sorry, I know I messed up a couple times. I don't normally read out loud. I normally read to myself, and I can read a lot faster that way, so I tend to stumble on the words a little bit. But thanks for watching and listening, and, you know, I hope that these past 20 minutes at least gave you some sort of, I don't know, simplicity. Reading is a very simplistic act in my eyes. So thank you. My name is Tegan again. It's good to see you guys, and let me know what you think. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.